Emily had spent the entire afternoon preparing for what she thought would be a quiet, ordinary evening with Daniel. After weeks of late nights and endless work calls, she had hoped that tonight would be theirs a chance to reconnect, to sit across the table and share laughter like they once had. The apartment smelled of fresh herbs and roasted vegetables. The table was set neatly with 2 plates, silverware arranged just so, and candles flickered softly in the dim light, casting gentle shadows across the room. She wore a simple dress, nothing extravagant, just something comfortable but pretty, the kind that made her feel confident without trying too hard. Her heart was restless as she moved from the kitchen to the living room, checking that everything was in place. She imagined Daniel walking through the door, tired but smiling, his eyes lighting up when he saw the effort she had made. She thought about the conversations they could have, the jokes they could laugh at, the stories they could share. She longed for a night that felt like it used to, when life hadn't been consumed by schedules and responsibilities. The anticipation made her both excited and anxious. Then the doorbell rang. Emily paused, surprised. She wasn't expecting anyone. Daniel had said he would be home soon, but a knock now was unexpected. She opened the door, expecting him to stand there with a smile, briefcase in hand. Instead, she found herself looking at a stranger. Tall, confident, with a kind but curious smile, the man introduced himself as Michael. He was Daniel's friend, he explained, someone Emily had only heard about in passing. Apparently, Daniel had invited him to join them, but he hadn't mentioned it to her. Emily felt a sudden rush of emotions, confusion, surprise, even a hint of annoyance. She had spent the day imagining a quiet dinner for 2, and now her plans had changed in an instant. But there was something in Michael's presence that made her feel unexpectedly calm. He carried himself with ease, polite and charming. And there was a warmth in his voice as he apologized for arriving unannounced. She stepped aside, letting him in, trying to adjust her expectations for the evening, as Michael settled into the chair across from her. Emily found herself curious despite her irritation. There was something magnetic about the way he spoke, the way he moved. He asked questions about her day, about the apartment, about small things she hadn't expected anyone to notice. His interest was genuine, and slowly Emily's initial annoyance began to fade. She smiled, finding herself answering openly without thinking too much about Daniel's absence. It was strange to feel so comfortable with someone she had just met. Yet there was a sense of ease that made the tension in her shoulders loosen. Dinner began, and Emily tried to keep the conversation light, asking about Michael's work, his hobbies, and how he and Daniel had met. But he had a way of turning even simple topics into meaningful discussions. He spoke about the challenges he had faced in his life, the small victories that mattered to him, the lessons he had learned along the way. Emily listened, captivated. She shared stories of her own, the little moments that made her smile, the frustrations she faced at work, the quiet dreams she held close. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly heard. The minutes passed quickly, and Emily noticed herself relaxing in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. There was laughter, small jokes, and an easy flow of conversation that felt natural, not forced. She realized that she had been missing this connection, attention, someone who genuinely listened. Michael didn't interrupt or judge. He simply responded with empathy and curiosity, and it felt refreshing. There was a subtle tension, too, one that wasn't uncomfortable but electric in its intensity. She caught herself looking at him longer than necessary, noticing details she hadn't paid attention to, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the quiet confidence in his gestures, the warmth that seemed to radiate from him. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. What should have been a simple dinner for 2 had turned into a conversation that made Emily feel alive again. She realized that she had been craving more than just food and comfort. She had been craving connection, understanding, and the feeling of being truly seen. Michael offered that without even trying, and it both thrilled and unsettled her. She thought about Daniel, about their routine, their comfortable but distant companionship. She wondered how it had come to this, that she could feel such a pull toward a stranger while sitting in her own home, preparing a meal for her husband. Then, Almost suddenly, the sound of keys in the lock broke the spell. Daniel was home. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she glanced toward the door. She felt a strange mix of relief and tension. Relief that he had arrived, tension because the dynamic had shifted so subtly but so strongly in his absence. Michael noticed it too, and he gave her a quick knowing smile before standing. Emily felt a pang of something she couldn't name: disappointment. Perhaps that the evening had changed, or fear of what this meant for her feelings. Daniel stepped inside, tired but smiling politely, and greeted Michael warmly. The house that had felt intimate and quiet just moments before now seemed charged with unspoken energy. Emily tried to act naturally to welcome Daniel as she had intended, but she couldn't shake the strange flutter in her chest. She caught herself glancing at Michael as he spoke, noticing the ease with which he carried the conversation, and she felt a subtle shift in her heart. The night was no longer about a dinner with her husband. It had become something more complicated, something she hadn't anticipated as they sat down together. Emily realized that this unexpected guest had changed the evening completely. It wasn't just the presence of another person. It was the way he had made her feel seen, alive, and engaged in a way she hadn't felt in years. She tried to focus on Daniel, to return to the comfort of their familiar routine. But the spark of curiosity, excitement, and emotion stirred by Michael lingered, quietly but insistently. She didn't know what it meant or where it would lead. But one thing was certain: this dinner was no longer just a quiet evening at home. Something had shifted, and Emily could feel it in her chest, like a heartbeat she hadn't noticed before, steady and unrelenting. And as she served the last of the dishes, she caught Michael's eye once more, that same quiet warmth that had drawn her in at the door. For a brief moment, everything else fell away: the tiredness, the routine, the expectations. All that remained was the awareness that life and love could surprise you in ways you never imagined. And Emily knew, deep down, that tonight was only the beginning of something she didn't yet understand, but couldn't ignore. The moment Daniel stepped inside, the dynamic of the evening shifted instantly. Emily tried to smile, to make everything feel normal. But the warmth that had flowed naturally between her and Michael lingered in the air like an unspoken secret. Daniel greeted Michael politely, a hint of fatigue in his voice, and the three of them settled around the table. At first, the conversation felt routine, polite, the kind that filled silence without really connecting hearts. But Michael had a way of gently steering the discussion, asking Emily about her art, her dreams, and her quiet passions, things Daniel rarely asked anymore. Emily found herself opening up again, sharing stories that had been tucked away behind her everyday routine. She spoke of the small projects she worked on, the sketches she had been saving for months, the ideas that filled her mind when the world was quiet. Michael listened with genuine interest, his eyes attentive, his responses thoughtful. Each question he asked pulled her deeper into conversation, peeling back layers she hadn't realized she had hidden. She felt a thrill she hadn't felt in years, the feeling of being truly seen, heard, and understood. Daniel answered when addressed, but his replies were short, distracted, and distant. He checked his phone once, then again, excusing himself for a work message, leaving Emily with Michael once more. In those moments, the space between them grew charged with something unspoken. Michael spoke of his own life, of successes and regrets, of lonely nights and small victories that never seemed enough. He shared moments of vulnerability that were raw and human, the kind that made Emily feel her own walls crumble just a little. She realized she hadn't felt this open with anyone in a long time, not even Daniel. The conversation turned naturally from dreams to love and life. Not in an obvious or heavy way, but in quiet, thoughtful ways that touched Emily deeply. Michael asked her about the small things that mattered, what brought her joy, what made her feel alive, what she longed for but never admitted aloud. Emily felt a shiver of recognition in his words, as if he understood pieces of her that even she had ignored. The more she spoke, the more she realized how distant she had felt in her marriage lately. How little attention had been paid to her thoughts, her heart, her desires. Michael's presence was awakening something inside her, a mix of curiosity, longing, and something almost electric in the quiet. Michael had a way of noticing the smallest details about her, complimenting without flattery, and asking questions without intrusion. He remembered little things she mentioned in passing, connected dots she hadn't even realized she had left. Emily laughed more freely than she had in weeks, the sound startling even her. It was light, easy, and infectious, carrying warmth and joy that had been missing from her days. Daniel glanced at her a few times, and she could sense his awareness, but he said nothing. For the first time, Emily noticed the quiet tension that existed between comfort and desire, between familiarity and excitement. Time seemed to move differently around Michael. Minutes stretched into hours, yet the conversation never felt forced. They spoke about childhood memories, favorite books, the movies that shaped them, and the simple dreams they carried quietly. Michael spoke with a reflective, almost poetic calm that made Emily think about things she had never voiced. The intensity of the dialogue was subtle, emotional rather than romantic in an obvious sense. But it touched something deep inside her heart she had thought was numb. She felt alive, seen and appreciated in ways that words rarely captured. Even as Daniel returned from a quick break to check on a work message, the bond between Emily and Michael lingered. Their eyes met over the table a few times, small smiles shared that carried unspoken understanding. Emily realized she was not thinking of Daniel the way she should have been. Her heart had shifted toward someone she barely knew, and the realization made her both excited and guilty. She tried to remind herself that Michael was just a guest, a friend of her husband's. Yet the warmth and connection he brought were undeniable. Michael, for his part, seemed aware of the subtle tension, but handled it with grace. He spoke with sincerity, never crossing boundaries, yet his presence left a mark that Emily couldn't ignore. There was something in the way he understood her, the way he asked questions that made her reflect on her own life. That made her feel a spark she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about attraction in a physical sense. It was deeper, emotional, the kind that made someone feel alive and noticed. Emily found herself leaning in during conversations, her attention fully captured, her laughter easier, her smiles more frequent. As dessert arrived, the room felt heavy with unspoken words. Daniel continued to answer calls and respond to messages. The energy between him and Emily, distant but polite. Michael observed quietly, his calm presence acting almost like a mirror, reflecting back what Emily had been feeling for months but hadn't admitted to herself. She realized that the spark wasn't about betrayal, it was about recognition, emotional connection, and understanding. She had missed feeling understood, valued, and truly seen. Michael had given that to her effortlessly, and it unsettled her more than she expected. By the time coffee was served, Emily felt a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude for the evening, confusion about her heart, curiosity about Michael, and a quiet sadness about what she had lost with Daniel. She noticed herself stealing glances at Michael when Daniel's attention faltered. Noticing the way he listened, the warmth of his smile, and the genuine interest in her thoughts. The evening had begun with polite conversation, but it had grown into something far more intimate, emotional, and unexpected. Finally, Michael stood to leave, his jacket over his arm, his tone calm but slightly serious. "Sometimes," he said softly to Emily as they walked toward the door, "one dinner changes everything." His words lingered in the room, subtle yet powerful, and Emily felt the weight of them in her chest. Daniel, oblivious to the depth of the connection that had formed, nodded politely, expecting nothing more than a routine goodbye. Emily's heart, however, had shifted. The evening had awakened something she hadn't anticipated, leaving her with questions she couldn't easily answer. After Michael left, the apartment felt quieter, heavier, almost different. Emily sat back in her chair, thinking about every word, every glance, and the unexpected warmth that had filled the room. She realized she had experienced something re-rand emotional connection that was deep, honest, and gentle, the kind that left a lasting impression. She wondered how she would navigate her feelings tomorrow, how she would reconcile this with her marriage, and what Daniel would think if he noticed the subtle change in her demeanor. The night ended with Emily staring at the window, replaying conversations, smiles, and the unspoken bond she had felt. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Michael's presence had left a mark she could not erase. The evening was no longer just a polite dinner, had become a turning point, a moment of awakening that would linger in her heart long after the plates were cleared and the candles burned out. Emily knew that tomorrow, and perhaps the days to come, would be shaped by this unexpected dinner. Something had shifted subtly but undeniably, and deep inside she felt both the thrill of possibility and the weight of uncertainty. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but she knew that she could never look at her marriage or herself the same way again. The emotional spark had been lit. There was no turning it off. When Daniel finally sat back down after checking his phone for the last time, Emily felt a quiet tension settle over the table. The easy rhythm of conversation she had shared with Michael earlier had left a lingering echo in her mind. And now, with Daniel present, it was impossible to ignore. Michael, noticing the shift, smiled politely at Daniel and asked about his work. Daniel answered, distracted and tired, his voice polite but flat, as though his mind were elsewhere. Emily tried to follow along, but she felt the weight of absence between them, a distance that had grown over the months and seemed possible to bridge tonight. Michael, however, did not falter. He turned his attention back to Emily, not in a way that was intrusive, but in a way that filled the gaps Daniel had left. "You mentioned your art earlier," he said, leaning slightly forward. "How's the painting you were working on? The one with the city lights?" Emily blinked, surprised that he remembered. It was a small thing, a detail she had thought forgotten, but Michael's attention made it feel significant. She found herself smiling, talking animatedly about her process, the colors, the struggles, and the little victories. Daniel listened from the corner of his eye, but the spark in Emily's expression was undeniable. And Michael noticed it too. Emily felt a strange mixture of guilt and exhilaration. Here was a man who had stepped into her home uninvited. Yet he seemed to understand parts of her that Daniel hadn't touched in months. She laughed more freely than she had in a long time, sharing stories and frustrations with her work and her life. Michael listened intently, nodding, asking gentle questions that made her think deeper, reflect on choices she had made and dreams she had tucked away. It wasn't flirtation, was connection, raw and genuine. And it struck a chord she hadn't realized was still there. Daniel shifted in his chair, sensing the energy, but he didn't interrupt. He continued answering a few work-related questions, his responses functional, lacking the warmth and curiosity Emily now craved. For the first time, she realized how much she had been missing, how distant she had felt from her husband. Michael's presence highlighted not just what she desired, but what had quietly been absent. Every glance, every thoughtful question made her heart race in a way that was both exciting and frightening. She tried to push the thought away, reminding herself this was her husband's friend. Nothing more, but the connection was undeniable. As the meal progressed, Emily noticed herself leaning forward in conversation, hanging on Michael's words and forgetting to watch Daniel. He was there, of course, polite and present in form, but absent in the emotional space that mattered. Michael, by contrast, was fully present, giving her the attention she craved, not demanding, just noticing, listening, reflecting. When he shared stories of his own life, moments of loneliness, and quiet victories, Emily felt empathy, admiration, and a strange longing that she hadn't felt in years. The intensity of the moment wasn't romantic in a conventional sense, but it was intimate emotionally, and it made her pulse quicken with awareness. Emily caught herself stealing glances at him, noticing the subtle ways he listened, the tilt of his head when she spoke, the way he smiled when she laughed. Every small gesture felt meaningful. She realized she had been starved for recognition, for someone to see her fully. And here it was, quietly, unexpectedly, through the presence of another person. Michael didn't overstep. He didn't push. He merely existed as someone who truly observed and engaged with her, and it left a mark she could feel in her chest by the time dessert arrived. Emily was caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: gratitude for the connection, confusion about her feelings, guilt over her attention drifting from Daniel, and curiosity about what this meant for her heart. Michael asked about her childhood memories, her favorite moments growing up, and little stories she hadn't shared with anyone in years. Each question, each smile, made her feel a warmth she hadn't felt in her marriage lately. She realized that her heart had responded not because of attraction alone, but because someone had truly listened and seen her. Daniel finally put his phone down for a longer stretch, but the silence he brought into the room was heavy. Emily felt the contrast sharply: Michael's engagement versus Daniel's absence. It wasn't that she didn't love Daniel. She did. But she hadn't realized how much she missed being noticed, appreciated, and truly understood. Michael's presence was a mirror, reflecting back the gaps in her life. The emotional distance she had accepted quietly over the years. She felt torn loyalty to Daniel, yet a pull toward something that awakened her in a way she hadn't expected. As the evening wound down, Michael stood to leave. Emily felt a pang of disappointment she hadn't anticipated. Their conversation had been effortless, warm, and deeply personal. He paused at the doorway, looking at her with calm, sincere eyes. "Emily," he said softly, "sometimes one evening changes everything, even if it seems ordinary." The words lingered in the air, weighty and quiet. Emily's heart responded in ways she didn't fully understand. Daniel, polite but unaware, offered a nod of thanks for the evening, assuming it had been routine. After Michael left, Emily felt a strange emptiness, as though a part of the evening lingered in the room, unseen but present. She sat down, replaying their conversations, noticing every laugh, every thoughtful look, and every quiet pause. She realized she had been alive in a way she hadn't been for months, caught between gratitude for the moment and the unsettling pull of what it had awakened inside her. Daniel, exhausted from work, was already retreating to his routines, but Emily's mind refused to quiet. She walked to the window, gazing at the quiet street below, reflecting on the evening and what it had revealed. Michael's words, his attention, and the ease of their connection lingered like a soft echo in her mind. She knew that nothing had happened in a physical sense, no betrayal, no dramatic moments, but her emotions had shifted in ways that couldn't be ignored. She felt alive, curious, and unsettled all at once. The room felt emptier with Michael gone, and she realized that his presence had highlighted what she had been missing in her own life. Emily also noticed how her perception of Daniel had subtly changed. She loved him, yet she realized how much of their marriage had become routine, predictable, and emotionally distant. Michael had shown her the possibility of connection, of being truly seen, and it made her reassess her own desires, her own heart. The tension she felt wasn't shameful, it was awareness. A recognition that life could surprise you with moments that challenge what you had always assumed. The night ended quietly, but Emily couldn't shake the emotional shift that had taken place. The dinner had been ordinary in appearance, polite and well-mannered, but beneath the surface, it had stirred something deep within her. She felt curiosity, longing, and a quiet hope she hadn't admitted to herself in years. Michael had left, but the impact of his presence lingered like a gentle pulse in her heart, reminding her that life and love were more complicated and richer than she had allowed herself to feel recently. As she finally prepared for bed, Emily couldn't stop thinking about Michael's smile, his questions, and the way he had seen her. She realized that the evening had been a turning point, not because of him, but because it had shown her what she had been missing and what she still wanted from life and love. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she understood that something had shifted inside her, quietly, profoundly, and permanently. The night after Michael left, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the evening had changed something deep inside her. The apartment was quiet, but her mind was anything but. She replayed every word, every glance, every laugh shared across the table. Michael's presence had stirred emotions she hadn't acknowledged in months. a mixture of warmth, curiosity, and a quiet longing that she could not name. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, that it had been a polite conversation over dinner, but her heart disagreed. Something had shifted. Daniel, exhausted from work, went straight to bed, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts. She sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street below, reflecting on the evening and the unexpected depth of her connection with Michael. She realized that in the calm, gentle way he had listened, he had made her feel seen in a way Daniel hadn't in a long time. It wasn't just attention, it was understanding, empathy, and a quiet affirmation that her thoughts, feelings, and dreams mattered. She had longed for that in her marriage, and Michael had offered it effortlessly. Without judgment or expectation, Emily's mind wandered through every moment of the evening. She remembered the way Michael had remembered details she had mentioned casually. The way he had encouraged her to share her hopes and small triumphs, and the laughter that had flowed naturally between them. It was intoxicating in the gentlest of ways, not the excitement of forbidden attraction, but the quiet thrill of being understood, appreciated, and acknowledged. She realized that she had been missing that spark in her daily life, the simple joy of emotional connection, and it left her restless, questioning, and unexpectedly alive. As she thought about Daniel, Emily felt a complex mix of love and sadness. She loved him, of course, but the distance that had grown between them over the years was undeniable. He worked tirelessly, focused on providing, solving problems, and maintaining routines. But somewhere along the way, the deep emotional closeness had faded. Michael hadn't asked for anything from her. He had only seen her, and that had been enough to make her heart stir. She felt a pang of guilt for feeling drawn towards someone else. Yet she understood it wasn't about betrayal, it was about awakening, about realizing what had been missing in her life. Emily decided to walk through the apartment, touching the surfaces, noticing details she had overlooked before. The soft flicker of candlelight from the previous night, the subtle aroma of herbs still lingering in the kitchen, the quiet hum of the city outside, all seemed charged with memory. She remembered the moment Michael had said, "Sometimes one dinner changes everything." The words had seemed simple, almost casual, but now they resonated in her heart with profound weight. That one dinner had shifted her perspective on connection, love, and the life she had been living without truly noticing. She thought about her marriage, the long years with Daniel, the shared routines, and the love that had grown comfortable and predictable. Emily loved Daniel deeply, but she realized she had been longing for more than comfort. She had been longing for presence, for attention, for a feeling of being truly alive in someone's eyes. Michael had shown her what it felt like to be seen in that way. She knew she had a choice: to let the spark fade as a fleeting memory, or to confront the truth about her own heart and what she needed. The next morning, Emily woke with a sense of clarity. She made breakfast quietly, thinking about how to navigate her emotions. She knew she couldn't speak about Michael in detail to Daniel Litt was his friend. After Albert, she could address the growing distance between them. She resolved to find the courage to open her heart to honest conversations, to express the needs she had ignored for so long. The evening with Michael had been a mirror, showing her the gap between what she had and what she longed for. It was not a condemnation of her marriage, but a call to awaken and reconnect. Later that day, Daniel came home, tired and distracted as usual. But Emily noticed him in a new way. She saw the familiar lines of his face, the quiet gestures that had once made her heart flutter. And she realized that love was still there, buried beneath routine and distance. She decided to start small, asking him about his day with genuine curiosity, sharing moments from her own life with honesty, and noticing the little ways they could reconnect. The dinner with Michael had shifted her heart, but it also gave her perspective on what she wanted from Daniel. She wanted love that was awake, present, and mutual, not absent or routine. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Emily felt a quiet resolve. She listened to Daniel, engaged with him in ways she hadn't in months, and shared her thoughts and dreams openly. She noticed the subtle shift in him, too. He seemed more present, more attentive, perhaps sensing her renewed energy and engagement. It was a delicate dance, one of rediscovery. And Emily realized that love required effort and awareness, even in a long marriage. The experience with Michael hadn't replaced Daniel, it had reminded her of the depth of emotional connection she craved and the work she was willing to invest. To bring it back into her life as the evening progressed, Emily felt a mixture of peace and excitement. The spark that Michael had ignited in her heart was not gone knit, was now tempered with understanding, reflection, and choice. She realized that life and love could be complicated, filled with unexpected moments that challenged her assumptions. But that didn't mean they were dangerous or wrong. It meant they were alive, real, and capable of transformation. She felt gratitude for Michael's presence, not for what he had taken or offered, but for what he had revealed, the capacity for her own heart to feel deeply, too long, and to awaken even after years of routine.